This video will discuss how to cite several primary sources using Chicago referencing style. You may have assignments where you need to consult a primary source, particularly if you are a history student. Hopefully, this video will give you a few tips on how to confidently cite these primary sources. Before we proceed, we first have to ask, what is a primary source? Well, the definition I like is from the Library of Congress, and it's that primary sources are the raw materials of history, original documents and objects which were created at the time under study. They are different from secondary sources, accounts, or interpretations of events created by someone without first-hand experience. So that will give us a little bit of a foundation as we go through. Now, there are many number of items or documents that could serve as primary sources, but just a few examples can include newspaper articles that cover the events in question that you're studying, different diaries from the time period or letters written by people in the time period that you're studying, government documents, maps, speeches, interviews of people with firsthand experience of the event, and so forth. A couple quick disclaimers before we move forward. First, this is not going to cover how to find primary sources. This video assumes that you have your sources already and you just need assistance with citing them. Second, it is impossible to cover every single primary source out there because there are far too many examples of what a primary source could be depending on what your research is. But we are going to cover a few common primary sources. In this video in particular, we will go over source books, diaries, letters, reports, newspapers, and magazines. We will cover government documents, interviews, and other oral teachings in a separate video. So the first example is a source book, which can usually be a collection of different documents or reports all put together in one book. This one's simple enough. You just cite it as you would an ordinary book. If you wish to cite a report, the general guidance is to also cite it like a regular book, at least to the best that you can. Sometimes reports won't necessarily have all the information that a published book might have, but you can include as much as you have available. Letters or diaries are another common primary source because having those personal correspondence from a particular time period can be invaluable for getting an insight into what some of the various attitudes of the day were. So the general way that you'll want to cite those is that you'll want to include the author's name. Then you'll want to include in italics the name of the document. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward, like a private diary or letter from one person to the next. Other times you will want to include a brief description. Next, you'll want to include the format, so letter, diary, etc. And if possible, if it's a published diary, you will include the city and publishing company. A lot of times, it's not going to be a published document, so you can just include either the copyright date, if it's available, if not, the date that it was published or obtained. Now, if it's available, you'll want to include the document number if you obtain this diary or letter from a particular archive. And you'll also want to include the page number, again, if it's available. And you definitely want to make sure that you list where you got the source. So for example, we got this letter from the Parliamentary Archives website. And down below, you will see we got this diary from the National Archives. And since a lot of these diaries or letters can be of various collections, you want to make sure that you include the collection name, such as the Suffragettes or Diaries of Roger Casement. Make sure that your reader can find this easily. And of course, if you obtained it online, do make sure to include the URL. Another useful primary source can be newspaper articles that are a first-hand account of a particular event. I have the basic template right here, but we'll go through it with a specific example. So first we'll want to include the author's name. You'll want to include either the headline or column in quote marks, so in this case, no sufferance for the suffragettes. You will want to include the newspaper title, and sometimes you'll want to put the location in round brackets if it's not evidently clear. So if you are citing, for example, the New York Times, you don't need to put the location because it's obvious in the name where this publication location is. However, for the Times, that can be very similar to a lot of different newspapers from around the world. So in this case, we're going to put London, England in round brackets to ensure that we're very clear that this is the Times London that we're citing. And for newspapers, you will want to be very sure that the date is exact. You cannot get away with just the year or even the month and the year. The exact date is essential in order to find the exact newspaper article. So in this case, 1st of February, 1971. And you will want to put either the URL or the database where you found it. So here we found it through a Gale database. That's what I put on here. You might find a useful article in a magazine, and a lot of the information you include is similar to a journal article. But there are going to be a few differences, namely that the volume and issue aren't as essential for a magazine compared to a journal article, so you usually don't need to include that. However, you do need to include a more complete date. So for many journal articles, usually the year will suffice, or sometimes the month and the year. For magazine articles, you almost always need to include the full date, so month, day, year, if feasible. In our example here, we've got the author, Barbara Rose, in quote mark, the article title. We have Vogue as the magazine title, and we have the exact date along with the page number that we've got right here. And we could include the URL if applicable. Since I obtained this from a ProQuest database, that's what I put in this example. However, if I had obtained this article through the Vogue website, for instance, then I would need to include the URL. These are a few examples of primary sources. To learn about citing additional primary sources, watch the second primary sources video in this series. You can also visit the relevant course resource help page for your subject.